We Get Outdoors Nation. Often I think that we've lost the past to embrace the future, and not always it being a good thing. I believe there's stacks in the past that we have just forgotten about, and maybe if we reconnected with it, we'd have a better, balanced, more happy, successful, blah, blah, blah life. And today we're joined by somebody who is truly embracing in his area of the outdoors, the past. We've got Mr. Correy Hawk with us, founder of Organic Archery. This guy is a professional longbow dude. Correy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you having me on.
I know, it's sweet. I can't wait to find out everything about Organic Archery. Correy, what should the world know about you that they don't know about you already?
Oh, that they don't know about me already. I guess that despite everything that, you know, with these podcasts and Instagram and everything, one thing that not very many people know is that I'm actually a little bit of a digital minimalist. So very few apps on my phone, participate in very little social media. And I just try to disseminate information, but interact with it as little as possible so that I can focus on the things that matter a little bit more.
Wow. And have you always been like that in terms of being like a digital, a non-tech person, or is that something you've adopted recently?
It's been a little bit stronger for the last 5 years or so. I just had this revelation a few years back. I was living in this big house on 5 acres, and it was a lot to upkeep. The acreage was a full-time job after work every day, and it just really beat me down. So I saw this documentary called Minimalism that sort of really resonated with me. And so I sold the farmhouse and moved into a small 700 square foot house in a secluded part in an isolated little section of a small town, and downsized the property size to 1 acre, which is just perfect for my archery range. And that sort of just led me into sort of minimalism of different types, and digital minimalism came naturally.
Yeah. What other sorts of minimalism are you into?
Mostly just material possessions and digital space, you know, trying to keep interaction with technology out of my mental space so I can focus on my craft.
So tell us about this craft. How did you get into, how did you get into archery, just as a starting point?
Well, I come from a long line of hunter-gatherers and outdoorsmen, and my father's an accomplished bow hunter. He's been bow hunting his entire life, and he had a bow and arrow in my hands as early as I can remember. I think I have pictures of myself on my 3rd birthday actually getting my first bow. So that was the start of it all. I would carry this little plastic bow and arrow with me everywhere and shoot stuffed animals off the back of the couch with these little suction cup arrows. And it just, it followed me all through my youth. And then I kind of got away from it a little bit in high school as we become distracted by other things. And then I spent a few more years away from archery in the military. And when I got back from the military, I just became infatuated with it again. I bought myself a traditional bow. And I think it was sort of like a therapy for me, because it's a very deep mental experience when you're, you know, in the zone on the archery range. So I kind of took it up as a post-military therapy, moving meditation, and it's just been a snowball ever since.
That's incredible. You know, I went hunting for the first time ever this year. So coming from the UK, like in the UK, you can't own guns. You can't own anything that you think you should be able to own, you can't have in the UK. So coming from the UK, I'd never had a chance to experience that. And then I went hunting, rifle hunting earlier this year, and shot some deer for the freezer, different varieties, and that's meat for the family. And then with us was a guy who went out bow hunting every day, and it's my first like exposure. I'm like, with a rifle from 300 or 400 meters, you can take out a deer, and that's relatively easy. Like with a compound bow, the guys get into kind of 50 meters. How does it work with a longbow? How close do you actually have to get accurate with that thing?
I like to consider my maximum effective range about 30 yards. If it was like an elk or a moose sized target, I might go ahead and take a shot fairly confidently from 35 yards. But It would have to be a perfect situation with a broadside shot. Otherwise, 30 yards is max, but ideally I would really much prefer to be inside of 20. And it's not uncommon to get a shot, inside of 10 yards if you've got a good ambush spot set up. So it's definitely closer range, but as soon as you start stretching out past about 35 meters, it's the groups really open up. So you've got to decide what your maximum effective range is for taking ethical shots on animals after you've done the practice.
Well, I was going to say that. So the way to figure that out is plenty of time on the range, working out what your accuracy distance is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It takes a lot of practice to get good out past 30 to 35 yards consistently, but it's not that difficult. I think the average person could probably train for a season, like pick up a bow in the spring, train throughout the summer, and probably be accurate enough from 20 yards to ethically hunt in the fall if they're doing the practice and putting in the time. And
so when I pulled the trigger, right, it was the first time I'd ever shot an animal, and my heart rate jacked up to something crazy. I had a weird sensation in the back of my throat. It was like your vision doesn't work quite as clearly as you think it should do. Do you train to go and like put yourself under mental duress and then go shoot arrows, or how do you manage that?
I do it just for fun. A lot of times I'll shoot right after my workout. I have a little outdoor gym right next to my archery range. So a lot of times I'll shoot right after my workout so that I'm feeling fatigued and so that my heart rate's up. Other times I'll do just like moving archery drills where maybe I'm running back and forth in between positions between maybe 10 and 35 yards to kind of keep the heart rate elevated. But one thing that I've discovered that is vitally important in archery is breath work. So I've been the last probably 2 years or so, I've been very focused on breath work and tying it into my archery and my shot cycle. So if you're taking nice deep breaths and you're keeping yourself from that fight or flight mode, with the tight chest and the hyperventilation and the holding the breath, it can keep your heart rate down and keep the excitement level to a manageable place. But there's never going to be an experience that you can replicate while shooting at a target that's the same as when you're standing, 10 to 20 yards away from a large living creature and you're about to take their life. It's always going to give you an adrenaline rush. It's just trying your best to do the time outside of the woods to manage your adrenaline.
Tell me about the breath work. What is it that you do or what exercises or drills do you have that you do to go and help yourself manage that?
So prior to a shooting session, I'll maybe take 5 minutes or so where I focus on 5-second inhales and 5-second exhales, just big, deep, slow breaths. It kind of hyper oxygenates your system and gets you a little more focused and a little more relaxed. And then while I'm out on the range, I'll do, I have sort of an unorthodox way of teaching people how to shoot. That's a little bit different than traditional archery techniques, but a lot of archers focus on back tension, but I try to focus on chest expansion. So the easiest way for me to get full chest expansion is just a big, deep inhale before every shot. And as you're kind of, you're getting cyclic with your shots and you're, firing many arrows a day as you're doing this deep breathing before every shot, you start to get into almost like a state of mind where you're almost like in an oxygen high, and it increases your focus and it calms you down. And in my opinion, just makes you more accurate.
Cool. And where did you learn that from? Is that something you learned in the military or something you just invented, or where does it come from?
That's actually something that I read while going through some of the ancient archery texts like Arab archery and Saracen archery. There were cultures in the past that believed that a warrior archer should be able to hit his target with nothing but a focused mind and a deep breath. So that's where I first heard about it, and I started to put it into practice, and it really cleared up my head because the archery shot is complicated, and you can make it as complicated or as simple as you want. But as soon as I started to focus mostly on breath and drop some of the nuances of the shot cycle, it definitely improved my accuracy. Wow. And I imagine it was originally developed for war archery, but it comes in handy in every application.
I'd imagine it gets you very, very present in the moment. Like it gives you a lot of clarity in what you're doing and what you're about to do. Yeah, that's
definitely. Cool. And archery is very heavy on, mental focus, especially traditional archery where you have no sight aids whatsoever. I mean, your ability to focus your mind and your eyesight on a single object or even a tiny little spot on a single object in the whole environment is, it's very important. So the deeper you can get yourself into a state of concentration, the better you'll shoot for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like the word you used there several times about, earlier about ethical. The last thing you want to do is have some poor deer running around the backcountry, like lame, that you can't keep up with, and it just ends up dying a painful death or getting savaged by a mountain lion or something like that in a week's time. That just fills me full of horror.
Absolutely. It's already enough of, I think a lot of people that hunt, they don't like the act of killing, but it's all about, immersing yourself in the cycle of life and providing clean food for your family or your loved ones or yourself. But there's already enough emotional strain when you kill animals with a bow and arrow, and it's definitely many times worse if you wound an animal. I've wounded a turkey or two over the last handful of years because it's just they're very small targets. They're very hard to kill with a primitive longbow, and it's just a gut-wrenching feeling.
It was interesting. My push to go and try hunting was late last year. I went round a abattoir and saw how cows are killed, like from coming out of the truck to being held in pens to being zapped to so on and so forth. And it was one of the most horrific things I have ever seen. It is effectively just torture for cows. That's how they kill them. I mean, there is no other way to describe it. And then I was talking to a farmer and he was telling me about like the antibiotics and the chemicals they give the cows and what they feed them and whatever else. And I'm like, there has to be a better way of getting meat in my freezer for me and my family than this equivalent, this other thing. And when I went hunting earlier this year, and I saw a guy, from 200 meters shoot a kudu. So a kudu is like a horse-sized deer would be the best way of describing it. They're ginormous things.
Wow.
And, one second the deer was eating grass and the next second the deer was dead on the floor, and the deer probably died before he heard the crack of the bullet. And I'm like, actually, this thing has been eating grass for its entire life. It's seen no man-made chemicals or anything. And it's died in a second or two. It hasn't died being strung up by its hind legs and then this, that, and the other like they do in the abattoirs. I thought, actually, this is far more ethical than maybe how we all consume meat from, I don't know, Whole Foods or any other place like that.
Absolutely. And there's research that shows that the meat is actually affected by these animals who are in these really intense, stressful farming situations, and they die with tons of stress hormones and the cortisol and things like that in their blood. It affects the quality of the meat and the health benefits for us. So when you have an animal that's just chilling in the wild, grazing on some grass, and all of a sudden it feels a pinch and it doesn't even see you. This is an example of archery. If you make a perfect shot with your broadhead arrow, it's going to pass through the animal, rather effortlessly. Maybe they feel a pinch, they run off kind of scared and startled, and usually they'll stop not very far away from where they were hit and kind of look back at you and, like try to figure out what had just happened. And then they'll run off a few more meters and expire. And a lot of times they'll just kind of get wobbly, you know what I mean? And they don't really know what's going on. Maybe their legs are starting to give out from under them, or they're getting dizzy. So they just lay down and kind of try to rest and expire there. So it's so much less stressful for the animal. And, in every way compared to like a slaughterhouse.
I think people's, opinion of hunting is that people go out there, and maybe some people have done and people do, but just to go and like kill as many animals as possible in the shortest possible time frame and then just leave them rotting in the bush somewhere, or in the backcountry somewhere. And then that's it. And I don't think that people fully appreciate that for a lot of people, and now I can say me as well, it's about food, it's about family, it's about the freezer, it's about taking enough but not being greedy. And actually, I'm going to guess, and we don't know each other that well, but I'm going to guess that you don't have a lot left of the animals that you kill. Like, a lot gets used, whereas the wastage from commercial meat production is astronomical. Is that your philosophy, or how does it work for you?
Definitely. Yeah, I'm a big believer in using all useful parts of the animal. Like if it's a buck, the antlers, I'll save those. A lot of people like to keep the antlers just for show or just for whatever, but I don't usually hunt for trophy sized bucks. So usually I'll just end up with some small antlers, but those can be used as flint knapping tools or overlays for the bow tips, or, any number of things. You can also save the sinew from the back straps and sort of like the Achilles tendon area. And that's immensely useful in the archery world because you can fletch arrows with it or back bows with it. I don't really keep hides nowadays because tanning hides is a lot of work, and I'm pretty limited on time these days, but every piece of the meat gets used. I mean, it's stripped completely from the bone. I love organ meats, so as many of the organs that I can possibly use, I save and consume. And these animals are just stripped to the bone and butchered right here in the kitchen and packaged individually, packaged up by cuts, and it all gets consumed or gets shared. Definitely, there's a lot of sharing of the wild game meat in my family, so it gets passed out to friends or neighbors or my family members, and that way everybody gets to enjoy it.
That's awesome. You're helping the whole of your family and friends become healthier instantly. I love it. See, you mentioned a little while ago about hunting and you said ambush sites. So how does it work? Do you walk and stalk and walk and stalk? Do you deliberately set up ambushes? Because to get 10 to 20 yards away from an elk is that's really close.
Yeah, I feel like the most effective method of hunting large ungulates with a bow is definitely setting up an ambush spot. So knowing how to look down on the ground and identify sign, knowing how to see well-used trails that are, still getting traffic on a regular basis, and setting up an ambush spot where you've got good brush cover behind you to break up the human outline and good brush cover in front of you so that they can't see too much of your movement as you draw the bow, and just waiting, knowing prime hours, usually first light and last light are great for ambush. So as the deer are leaving and returning to their bedding areas, or the elk. So it's just really difficult to spot and stalk ungulates for sure. They've got great hearing. They've got great smell, and they don't have really great eyesight, but they can sense movement really well. So it's a real challenge to stalk. And
is the stalking for you and the ambush, setting up the ambush sites and whatever else and finding those locations, is that as exhilarating for you as the actual archery itself? Like that requires a huge amount of energy and concentration to do that.
I don't think, not for me personally, no, it's not nearly as satisfying as the actual act of shooting the arrow, but there's sort of a deep satisfaction about it, being able to read the trails and see which direction animals are moving, and to be able to see what size the animal is, how old the tracks are. I appreciate looking down on the ground, and there were a lot of native cultures that really valued tracking, and I think it's important. I think it's a good skill to have. If you're just going out into the woods and setting up blind and you don't know how to identify sign or see what the animals are doing in the forest or which direction they're headed, I mean, you're pretty much just shooting in the dark. You've got to understand animal behavior and animal movement if you want the best shot at success.
So how do people learn all that stuff?
You've just got to get out there. Yeah, I mean, books are a great resource. There are a lot of great tracking books. It's not really that hard to figure out, especially if you live in an area that gets rainfall or has softer soil. You just got to get out there. Like look on the ground. A lot of people never look on the ground, and a lot of people never look up. They just look at eye level, but just look down. You'll be amazed what you'll find. You can tell, I mean, if you go down to a creek bottom, for example, where there's a water source and just look down on the ground, you'll see tracks of all kinds of animals. There'll be maybe turkey tracks crossing through, raccoons, possums, deer, small birds jumping around. The ground tells the story of the forest. It's kind of like the journal of what's been going on in a particular area. And you can also look low in the trees where the deer have been rubbing, or where maybe the beavers have been cutting trees down. Just, try to familiarize yourself and go out and look at tracks. And if you're not sure, maybe bring a tracking field guide out with you so you can identify the tracks and know what to look for as far as how many toes it has. Are there visible claws or not? It's just trial and error. But there's no replacement for just getting out in the woods and getting some experience. Because you can read all day long, but one day in the bush, or especially one day in the bush with an experienced guide or an experienced teacher, will teach you more than that, dozens of books of just sitting in the house and reading and never actually seeing what they look like in real life.
Yeah, that's about somebody the other day was talking to me about foraging for mushrooms and saying, like, ignore the books because you'll poison yourself if you read the books, because the books can't teach you everything that you need to know, and you'll just end up you'll screw it up. So better to go with somebody who knows, who actually can show you the same mushroom, but like 4 different variations of it in different seasons and different weather conditions. And you can actually start appreciating what it is. The book isn't enough. That's cool.
Absolutely. And my family is really big into the mushrooms. My dad, he studies mushrooms and collects all of the mushrooms from the forest and tries to identify them. And he's very proficient, and we do a lot of mushroom hunting, and there would be no replacement for going out there. And a lot of people are very afraid of fungus because there are different species out there that can kill you. They're few and far between, but there are quite a few of them out there that could give you seriously upset stomach or vomiting or headaches. But if you want to learn about mushrooms, it's really not that scary. You can pick, like I always tell people, to pick their core 5 or their core 10, depending on how into it you want to be. But you can easily, in most regions, pick a core 5 edible mushrooms that are, one, easy to identify, plentiful. They grow in different seasons. Like maybe you've got 2 mushrooms that grow in the spring and 2 or 3 or 4 mushrooms that grow in the fall. So that if they're growing out of season, that's not what you're looking for. And just stick to your core 5, because there are so many mushrooms in the forest, thousands of them. I mean, if you pay attention to the ground, you'll see in one day 100 different species at least. So unless you want to be a mycologist, just learn the core 5 edibles in your area, and learn how to do spore prints, and learn how to identify pores versus gills and things like that. And stick to the core 5. You'll be good. There's a bounty of edible mushrooms out there in most regions, and they're delicious and totally safe.
I love it, because most people try and learn everything that there is to learn, whereas actually what you're saying is, like, find 5, know your shit about the 5, and stick to that, and life will be good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd never ever consume a mushroom on a maybe. If you're 95% sure and not 100% sure, you got to let it. If you're unsure, you got to leave it lay. So it's so much easier just to memorize and know without a shadow of a doubt that your core 5 are safe, and they're everywhere, so they're easy to spot. That's the way to go.
I love it. Is that as intriguing for you as the archery, the sort of foraging and wild foodie type stuff?
I would say that's pretty equal. Yeah. I spend a lot of time researching edible plants and medicinal plants and edible mushrooms. So I definitely like to forage in most of the environments that I find myself in. Try to familiarize myself with, mountain edibles for when I'm out there, or desert edibles, and definitely the local edibles here in what we have, which is basically Eastern Woodlands forest.
What do you think it is over the past 30 or 40 years that's turned people away? Well, let me rephrase that. I was thinking the other day that we've lost a lot of skills that our grandparents had, and our great grandparents had, from like the basics of, bottling and preserving vegetables, or even growing your own vegetables. I mean, like we seem to have the ability to sew just as like a really silly manual thing, or fix a hole in a sock, or we seem to have lost so much of that. What do you think it is that's caused that to happen?
Probably more than anything, convenience. I mean, back in our grandparents' day, there wasn't Hy-Vee 5 minutes down the street. So it's just, I mean, especially in the homesteading days, you had no choice but to fend for yourself and know how to preserve your food, because it's only going to be good for the seasons that it's ready to harvest. So it's just probably a lack of necessity, I suppose, in the real days, or I mean, in the modern times. You've got ripe fruit in the grocery store all seasons. I mean, it's December right now, and I can walk in and get bananas if I want. So it's just there's no need to know the information, I suppose, unless you value self-reliance and that type of information.
I just find it's producing a whole bunch of people who are if I was to use the word soft, I don't mean like they're not tough people, but like their level of like mental cognition and their physical ability to maneuver their body, to control their body, have muscle, so on and so forth. It just appears like we're becoming more jellified by the decade, and I wonder, A, is that healthy for us, and B, what are we actually doing to ourselves by pursuing convenience the whole time, as opposed to actually learning how to look after ourselves properly?
Yeah, man, I'm really passionate about that type of stuff, and I don't know, it's mind blowing. I totally agree that we're softening, and I think it. You can even just look at the children. I mean, back in my day, before the internet, or really before we watched much television, everything was outside. We were climbing and digging and running and just whatever, swimming in the rivers. And I think it sets you up a good foundation for an active and resilient life, where maybe you're used to suffering, or you've had some injuries and you know how to deal with those, or you've actually experienced extreme hot or extreme cold in your life. I think there's millions of people out there who've probably, the extent of their cold weather resilience is walking from the air-conditioned car through the cold into into the conditioned house or the warm house. So I don't even know. Yeah, I don't even know where to take this from there. It's the whole society, I think. Constant entertainment and constant comfort and readily available food. It's just there's not an actual need to be physically strong as a civilian. We're not fighting tribal wars anymore, or climbing up trees to get our food, or hiking miles every single day. There's just not a need to be the way that we were back then.
I find it ironic because the US is known as like the land of the free. That's the sort of like analogy that goes with it. And yet when you start pursuing convenience, you actually, every time you take a step towards convenience, you actually give up freedom at the same time, because the moment that Walmart or Costco or whatever it might be, Fred Meyer's, doesn't have what you want it to have, suddenly you have no ability to create it for yourself anymore. So you've actually put yourself at the control of those large corporations, which means you've given up freedom. And so it seems weird that a population can unwittingly give up its freedom without realizing it.
Yeah, without realizing it, I think, is the key. I don't know what it's like to be a person who doesn't know how to purify water or get my own food. And I can't even imagine what the amount of fear and uncertainty would come with that as soon as the littlest hiccup in society throws off your routine, and you can't get toilet paper anymore. You can't get bottled water anymore, or, whatever other situation you run into. I mean, you've become pretty much helpless. Like you said, under control. I mean, what are you going to do if you don't know how to get food? Are you just going to get in line at the military blockade, when all the grocery stores are shut down? and just hope that you get to just hope that they have enough water and food left for your family? Or are you going to take it upon yourself to, get some knowledge about at least your basics: food, water, and shelter, and fire?
Because it wouldn't take much, even in an urban environment, to harvest rainwater from your roof and to have a vegetable garden in your backyard. It doesn't take much to do. Ironically, it's remarkably simple, and even harvesting and preserving the stuff for months at a time is remarkably simple. It's not like it's a super complicated, overly strenuous thing to go do. It's actually a really simple place to start.
And it just takes a little bit of initiative and a little bit of sacrifice. Maybe instead of watching TV for the next 2 hours, you can, do some research, watch some YouTube videos on, like you said, rainwater collection, or planting vegetables, or preserving food, or finding wild food, or any number of other things that will serve you a little bit better than mindless consumption and entertainment.
It is bizarre. I personally really, really struggle with it. Having moved from the UK, where the UK is not dissimilar to the United States in many respects, and having then moved to South Africa, where stuff in South Africa habitually just does not work. Like, there is a slight risk that all the electricity to my house could be turned off, or not my house, but to the neighborhood as we're talking now. There is a risk of that, because it does happen. Like, a power station decides to stop working, and then they turn off half of Johannesburg, which will be, I don't know, the power for 6 million people will just get turned off in 10 seconds, and you'll be without power for 2 days until they decide to make the power station work again. Suddenly, since moving here, they're like, actually, I don't know. I've been into sort of like survival, bushcraft, prepping. I've guided expeditions all over the world. I never believed that I would need that skill set in my own home. And actually, living here, you need that skill set in your own home. Otherwise, you're just at the mercy of everybody and everything around you.
Definitely. And totally helpless when something goes wrong. Just sitting there, looking around like, what do I do now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's how riots and stuff happen. People complain, and then they all end up outside of the council offices or wherever it might be protesting. While they're protesting, somebody's then looting whatever's left in their house. And then they have even less than they started with. And yet you could just go and learn to look after yourself. And I think this year with coronavirus, I don't think that, since probably the Second World War, I don't think that we've got this close to needing to be able to be self-reliant when I don't know, things can stop working. I don't think we've got this close for maybe 100 years or 80 years. What do you reckon?
I agree. Yeah, definitely. When, you go to the store and which I don't drink bottled water anyway, I think it's ridiculous, but you go to the store and there's no water within 100 miles of where you live. There's no toilet paper within 100 miles of where you live. And it's just, I don't know. I think it obviously put people into a panic nationwide, but I'd say this is probably the closest we've come for sure. And it definitely, I think, gave people a little bit of a scare or a little bit of an uneasy feeling. And I think that there's a giant uprising in people that want to learn more about bushcraft and self-reliance, and that are paying more attention to maybe the survival shows or the outdoors or homesteading podcasts. I've seen definitely a huge spike in traffic, in interest in archery, especially traditional archery and handmade gear. So I think it definitely scared people, and it was the closest we came, and it gave them that little spark that they needed to maybe start looking into, being able to provide themselves the basics.
Yeah, because no matter what we like as humans, what we value, like survival of the fittest is a real thing. If you're out in the woods hunting, and you're trying to get a deer of some sort, and there's probably going to be a bear or a mountain lion that would quite like that deer as well. And it comes down to, you need to know what's behind you as well as what's in front of you. And survival of the fittest is a genuine thing.
Yeah. And, I, I mean, I kind of feel sad about it and guilty about it, but I think if a major catastrophe ever did happen, there would be a lot of people who, wouldn't make it. I don't know how else to say it. It's just, what are they going to do, in a real survival situation when they've maybe let their physical health deteriorate so much that they can't walk up a flight of stairs without getting out of breath? Or whether they walk out of the woods and they have no idea whether the plant that they're going to eat, or, whether the salad green that they're going to eat is about to give them like stomach paralysis, or, yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Hey, people, go out there, do exercise. That's my thing. So listen, you left the Marine Corps and you went back home to Nebraska, and obviously you said you got into archery as a therapy. How did you go from retiring from the Marines, getting into archery, and then turning it into your business?
So it started out as just a hobby. I kind of got out, like I said, and I just became interested in archery again. So I bought myself just a factory made mass produced bow. It was a Samick recurve. And I shot that for a little while, and I was really enjoying traditional archery. It reinvigorated my love for the sport entirely. So I started shooting a lot. Every single day after work, I was shooting my bow. And that led me to breaking a lot of arrows over time, just from being a terrible shot in the beginning and deflecting off objects or whatever the case may be, hitting a rock as I'm shooting in the woods. So I started not really wasting, but spending a lot of money on arrows, and that drove me to make my own arrows. And so I started making did a bunch of research on only arrow making. I had no interest in building the bow at the time. I was just interested in saving myself some money with my traditional bow. So I learned the art of arrow making, which is a whole craft separate from bows itself, and started with arrows. And then before long, I started to feel weird about shooting these homemade arrows out of my store-bought bow. So I thought maybe it'd be wise for me to learn how to make a bow. And I started reading everything I could get my hands on. I would get home from work every night and just read myself sick on books or internet forums or watch YouTube videos. And then I gave it a try. I started with boards. You can actually make a bow from a dimensional lumber at your hardware store, like hickory or red oak. So I started with board bows and got my first couple successful bows. They just started getting better with each one, and I just sort of got the bowyer's bug, I suppose, and it snowballed ever since. Graduated from the board bows into bows made from tree staves or like split logs, tree trunks, and as far as turning it into a business, I really had no desire to do it in the beginning. I was just, I was working in a limestone mine as a plant operations manager, and I was just kind of doing it as a hobby, something to keep myself busy at night. And then I started to make the bows, and some of my friends and family started to get interested. And as I built more and more bows, I was getting I was not on social media at all at the time. And I was getting a lot of pressure from my family and friends to put my work online. They're just saying things like, "Hey, you're making these really cool bows. You definitely got to put them online, like start a Facebook or start an Instagram or something." So I started an Instagram about 2.5 years ago, maybe. And that's the only social media that I use. But I just started to post my work on there. And some TV personalities from the History Channel and the Discovery Channel caught wind of my work just through Instagram, and they became interested in it. And I built some bows for some of the bigger names in the community, and that really, really started to build momentum for my page. And I was getting some interest in people buying the bows, so I started to sell them here and there for really cheap prices. I really wasn't taking it that seriously, and then it got to the point where. And for basically 6 years, I was working full time and coming home and building in the evenings or building over the weekends. I definitely spent most of my spare time building bows or arrows. So it got to the point where the requests, for people to order one got so high that I was just getting burnt out. There was like a 2-year period there where I was going to work full time and coming home and working all through the night until late at night, and then just getting a handful of hours of sleep and getting right back up and doing it over again, and then working all through the weekends. And after about 2 years of that, I got really burnt out, and I had to make the decision to either quit building bows for income or quit my job. And I decided I was just going to go for it. And I started Organic Archery, quit my job, and made it my full-time job.
How was that first? I remember when I set my first outdoor business up, and the day I left my job, and like one day you have a job with a salary, and the next day you like step into this void where, in your case, if you don't sell a bow or you don't sell arrows or a quiver, you don't make any money. How did it feel on that first day for you?
I think for the first several months, it was just a huge weight off my shoulders. The company that I had been working for years was going in a direction that I didn't really align with. So I kind of was having, a cleansing experience by getting that out of my life and risking it all to do it by myself. And I think that's really the only way to do it. In the end, like I always tell people, don't quit your full-time job right out of the gate. Like I worked my regular full-time job and then did this in the evenings and the weekend for 6 years before I finally made the leap. But don't quit your job. Don't quit your job right off the bat. Have this plan in mind and realize that there's going to be sacrifices up front. You're going to have to sacrifice some of your free time. You're going to have to sacrifice some of your weekends. And over time, maybe you're going to start to build some residual income out of your business. And then maybe within 4 or 5 years, it snowballs to the point where it's about to replace your full-time income. So, I mean, just the way that I approached it, where I didn't just jump out the window and hope for the best. I mean, it was a strategic plan that I had been working on for quite a few years. And I had built it to the point where it had mostly replaced my full-time income. So there wasn't a lot of fear. I think as an entrepreneur, there's always fear because there's highs and lows and, really high sales months and really low periods. And, but if you've done the work up front and made the sacrifices to set it up so that it's already fairly self-sufficient, once you go full time, it'll take a lot of the stress out of it.
Yeah. I've helped, probably over 400 different people now set up different outdoor businesses, where I've mentored them. And the thing I always say to people is have it as a part-time job. It is your side hustle, whatever phrase you want to give it. But everything you make, don't treat it like an additional top up to your income that you're currently making. Everything that you make, pay off your debt, save that money so that the day you do leave your job, you've actually got a positive bank balance. You've got some savings to fall back on. And maybe you've learned some resilience around your attitude towards cash. So we're not just spending on shiny shit because it's there. We're actually managing our money, because why most businesses don't work is because most business owners spend far too much money and don't get good at saving it, having a rainy day fund, so on and so forth. And so I think your advice, sticking with your job and being prepared to sacrifice your evenings and weekends, is fantastic. And I think treat that money as money that's not yours to spend yet. It's the money that is going to be there to spend when you do step into the unknown of what a business is.
Absolutely. It's a short-term, it's the short-term sacrifice for the long-term goal. I mean, and not treating that as supplemental income and putting it right back into your business. I mean, in my case, there's tools that need to be bought up front that are quite expensive, that increase your ability to produce. So every dollar that I made off of the bows just went right back into the business. And I'm a huge advocate for the debt-free lifestyle as well. That's something I'm very passionate about. And, I always tell people, just get out of debt, because I mean, it's basically indentured servitude to creditors. You have these bills that have to be met, and that's going to put a much higher stress on your income level. Whereas if you're debt free and maybe the only thing you have to worry about is, your rent, let's just say your rent and your utilities, then, it takes a much smaller income to have your needs met. and to keep food in the fridge and to have your lights on. And everything that you make past that is just supplemental income that you can either put back into the business, put into your personal savings account, instead of just sending it off by the hundreds of dollars a month on car payments and credit card payments and, you know, payments to the furniture mart for the couch you just had to have. I can't stress enough how important becoming debt free was for me in this journey. I wouldn't be where I am or doing what I'm doing if I wasn't debt free. There's no possible way.
I'm with you 100% because I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't debt free either. It is interesting if you go back to that sort of freedom concept we were talking about food, and you mentioned like servitude to those banks or large corporations. Really, like, if you get in debt, you are just giving away your freedom because you're putting yourself in the control of somebody who can, or an organization that can say, you've missed 3 car payments, so now the car's mine again, or you've missed 4 house repayments, now the house is mine, or whatever it is. You actually give away control of your life. And it's funny that, that the marketing messages have got so good that people don't realize that they're giving away control. That's my 2020 message is, if you want to be free, get control. And to get control, you need to learn to do a whole bunch of different stuff that the world might not understand or populations might not understand.
Absolutely. And it's just everywhere you look to. I mean, we're bombarded all day long by social media and advertisements on television and advertisements in the streets and malls and just like tech stores. Like, you know, I'm not going to name any names, but it's just, you're bombarded by these messages all day long that you have to have this fashionable item to be relevant in society, or to, you know, it's like a status symbol for us. The brand of clothes that you wear as a status symbol, the brand, the type and brand of cell phone that you carry as a status symbol. It's just, we place so much value on it that I think that people, they almost get, I'm just anxious about it, you know, anxious about being accepted or popular based on whatever the advertisements say is fashionable in today's society. Versus just just freeing themselves of that and focusing on what makes them happy, and realizing that most of that stuff really doesn't contribute to your happiness at all. It's just more weight to bear and more overhead for you to cover.
But it's funny that throughout our childhood and schooling, maybe not, some parents yes, some parents no, but childhood and schooling, the concept of conformity and fitting in with the Joneses is very, very heavily pushed by almost every aspect. And I guess then you join the Marines, where conformity really is very, very heavily pushed. Like, if you don't fit in, you're going to have a very hard time. And really, to do what we're talking about, you have to decide that I'm going to conform with a new, much smaller group of people than the mass population for my own benefit. And that requires some brave decision making when you don't have the new sofa, the new car, the new house, the new holiday home, the new new iPhone, or whatever it might be. It's a brave thing to do, but it's very liberating.
Definitely. You have to be willing to break away from the status quo and kind of not really care what people think. I mean, people are gonna think you're weird if you're in the woods, you know, digging around in the dirt for mushrooms. People are gonna think you're weird if you're walking around with a bison skin quiver on your back and you know, shooting animals with a bow and arrow. It's just doing it for yourself, and it's wildly freeing for sure. And as you know, you're breaking away from the societal norms and the security of things to discover your own way and provide for yourself. It's going to be liberating at the same time, because maybe you're getting a little bit of weird looks from people, you know, in your community as a whole, but the trade-off is learning how to be self-sufficient, and that's just more empowering than probably anything else that I can think of.
100%. I remember the day where my wife and I had cleared all of our debt. I remember, I will never forget that day. And it is singularly, it's been the biggest and best thing we have ever decided to do as a couple. And we weren't like obscenely in debt or anything. You know, we only had a home loan and a car loan, and that was it. Yeah, that was it. Nothing else. So like in comparison to most people, it's not like we were, 100K's worth of university bills and, so on and so forth. But that day where suddenly everything you touch is yours, like nobody else has any recourse on that stuff that you touch, it's mind-blowingly satisfying.
Absolutely. I can remember the day that I became debt-free like it was yesterday as well. It was a very powerful moment. Feels like the ultimate freedom, like the weight of the world's been lifted off your shoulders.
Yeah. And you get that paycheck, or you get that money from your business, and you actually can make real decisions about what you're going to do with it, as opposed to having to think, who do I need to pay first? Because that's the normal thing is like, what's the credit card that I need to put money towards, or what's the car loan that's got to have money towards, or so on and so forth. And the moment that just having that ability to make those decisions is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
It's phenomenal. So I've got a curious question for you. What's the secret to making a fantastic longbow?
Understanding the tillering process. That is number one. So the tillering process is, there are a lot of species of trees that'll make a bow. I always tell people that if you're unfamiliar with the bow species that you have in your area, just find a hardwood tree, a native hardwood tree, or non-native, it doesn't even matter, just something that grows in your region, but a hardwood tree that produces a nut, a fruit, or a berry, and you're probably going to be able to craft a bow from it. That's it's a pretty good place to start. So it really comes down to the tillering process, which is it's the process by which you take a bow blank, which is basically just a bow shaped stick. You've roughed out the front and the side profiles and it's beginning to look like a bow, but it has no bend in it whatsoever. And systematically removing wood from the strong areas and leaving the weak areas alone until you have a beautiful even arc out to whatever your desired draw length is. So the tillering process is by far the most difficult to learn. It's where a lot of people are going to break. It's where a lot of people are going to break their first couple of attempts at making a bow because maybe they've, created an overly weak area or a really weak limb that they can't recover from. So that is hands down the most important. You can make a really good longbow out of a subpar wood if your tillering skills are on point.
So I'm going to guess, as no one piece of wood is the same, no one of your bows is the same, because you've got to go and look at that piece of wood and work out where it's going to be stronger, weaker, where there was a small knot at one point in time, who knows, whatever it might be. So every bow you produce, is it 100% unique? That's the thing?
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. It's unique, one of a kind. And I'm very happy that I'm very thankful for my customers and them giving me the artistic freedom to just trust me, because I never know what I'm going to get when I get into a piece of wood, but I don't really have a choice. You know what I mean? I'm cutting down wild trees and it's a raw material that I'm just taking from its natural form. So I don't know what the finished product's going to look like until well into the build. So I'm very happy that customers, are usually very comfortable with giving me the artistic freedom to just kind of place an order for a bow and know that it's going to be 100% unique, and there'll never be one before it or never another one like it. And hopefully when they receive it, they just fall in love. But that's a big part of what I do, is just the one of a kind aspect. And it all has to do with everything, the properties of the wood, the growing conditions, the whether they've had droughts or bad soil, or whether, like you said, there's branches or knots. You have to know how to navigate all that stuff. But it's really cool because none of them are the same.
Well, that's it. And like how many rings, how tight the rings are in the wood as well. So has it grown slow or has it grown fast? All of that will have a big impact on the strength of the wood, how thin you can make it, so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yep. Like what proximity is it growing? Like how close is it to other trees of the same species? Is it getting all of the nutrients from its soil area, or is it sharing nutrients with all the other trees? It's how much water is it getting? Is it grown slowly because it's not getting enough? Or sometimes you'll get a tree that just grows I mean, I've got some trees in my shop right now that are split out into staves, and by the time I get the bow down to like bow blank size, there's probably only going to be one or two growth rings in the entire limb. So they might have 1/2 inch thick growth rings where the trees grew really large and really strong very quickly.
That's incredible. So do you, you go and harvest the wood yourself, I'm assuming, to go and make the bows. Do you then, do you carve it when the wood is still wet, or do you dry the wood and then tiller it?
There are a couple different ways that it can be done. I am harvesting my own wood from local farms here in Southeast Nebraska. Or, I mean, I would say at least 98% of the trees that I use are harvested and split out by myself on farms here. And then the other couple percent are just trades that I do with other bowyers from other regions to maybe get a hold of a better quality hickory tree that grows down south, or maybe a tree from, the Pacific Northwest that I can't get in this region. But I forgot the original question. Where were we going with that?
No, so I'm just curious about, so I do quite a lot of bushcrafty stuff. And if you're going to carve a spoon, I like to use a silver birch and carve the silver birch while it's still green, because it's much easier to carve it then. Right. Do you do the same when you're tillering a bow, or do you wait for it to dry?
Yeah, so it can be done both ways. You can carve out your bow blank when it's green, although you are going to increase the risk of, splitting or getting check marks, which are like drying cracks in the back of the bow or the belly of the bow. But it will greatly speed up the process if you rough it out into a bow blank while it's still green. And then certain measures have to be taken to seal the back so it doesn't split. So usually I'll chase the bow down to like one ring above the desired ring that I'm going to chase, and then seal it with something thick and heavy, like maybe a shellac or maybe a house paint or something that's going to stop all moisture loss from coming out of the back of the bow. And then if you've taken it down that far, you might only have to wait, 3 to 6 months for the wood to be at a stable moisture content. Whereas if you cut it down as a stave, which, I mean, you, as a bowyer, you always want to have a backup reserve of staves. So I have, probably close to 100 of them drying in the shop at all times. And it's always a big revolving door where, as trees are being used, I'm going out and cutting new trees. But ideally, you want to let the wood season in full stave form for 1 to 2 years before it's going to reach a stable moisture content where it can be crafted into a bow. So I always kind of advise people when they're first getting started, because nobody wants to cut down a tree and split it into staves and wait, 1 or 2 more years before they can start this project. So it can be done with green saplings, especially, is a great place to start, a small diameter tree, so that you don't even have to worry about the seasoning process. You can just get your bow blank roughed out from a smaller diameter tree, let it dry out for a couple of months. Maybe you get a small stash of small diameter trees so that you've got a few different attempts in case you break one. But then you've only got to wait a couple months and you're ready to start crafting into a bow, and you can hone your skills on those sort of, because a green tree is not going to perform nearly as well as a seasoned tree. So you can sort of hone your tillering skills on a little bit greener wood. And then if you break one, it's no big deal. But you can get some of the cobwebs worked out of your process early on with wood that doesn't require a 1 year wait.
So if people want to get into making longbows for themselves, from what I'm hearing is there's an immense amount of knowledge and skill, but actually patience is the number one thing that's required. If you want to go and do this as a hobby for yourself, if you're not going to go and spend the money and buy a bow from Organic Archery, you need the patience of a saint.
Yeah, you need patience to let your wood season. I mean, if you try to push it and make a bow out of wood that's too green, it's just going to be nothing but problems. It's going to be drying out during the process. It's going to be gaining weight. You're going to be having to make constant adjustments. So the first step in the patience is just waiting at least 1 year for a full stave to dry. And also the tillering process takes a great deal of patience. And that's where a lot of people go wrong, because they'll get impatient with the process. Sometimes it can take many hours or even sometimes several days of just scraping slowly on these limbs to get the bend perfect. And it has to be perfect, because that's how you're distributing the stress evenly across the whole limb so that the bow lasts a lifetime and not just a few shots. But it's very easy to become impatient after, say, 2 or 3 hours of just taking off 20 scrapes at a time, and the bow's being stubborn, and it's not, you know, the area that you just keep scraping is not letting go. And yeah, you got to be patient. If you're impatient in making recurves or longbows, you'll fail most of the time, or have subpar shooters that, you know, shock your hands or have poor arrow cast. So
is it a thing that you can go and let rip with your power tools, or is it far better to take your time and use mostly hand tools? What's your preference?
It's far better to start with hand tools. And that kind of goes back into like the early overhead business expenses. I mean, people think that they need, you know, the full size wood shop with the 14-inch bandsaw or the 18-inch bandsaw and the, you know, all the different hand tools, when really you can get started, I mean, in bow building with nothing but a hatchet, a sharp knife, and you know, maybe a farrier's rasp and some sandpaper. So power tools come into play a little bit later, like in the situation that I'm in where production's very high, and I'm trying to turn out as many of these as I can so that my customer, or, you know, and fairly quickly so that my customers don't have to wait extremely long time periods. I mean, they're already waiting. My average is probably about 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the season. So, you know, people are handing over their money and they're already having to wait 3 months to receive the product. And I've reached the point where I'm using power tools for maybe 1 or 2 steps of the process. For me, one of the most valuable power tools is the 14-inch bandsaw. And the only thing that I use that for is just mass stave reduction. So it's basically taking like a 4-inch stave to a 2-inch stave, or like taking a stave that's maybe 4 or 5 inches deep and using the bandsaw to make it 2 inches deep, so that you have less work with the hand tools. And when you're doing it all day, every day, like I am, it saves a lot of wear and tear on your body over pecking at a full size stave with a hatchet for hours on end, trying to get the bow profile roughed out. I can do half the work with a large bandsaw and then move into hand tools for all the precise work. So they are still handcrafted all the way from the beginning. It's just that if there's a massive piece of wood, I'm definitely going to use my one power tool to reduce it. Yeah. But for beginners, it's always best to just start with hand tools, familiarize yourself with the process. It'll make you a little bit more, intimate with the process, and it'll make you a little bit more connected to the wood because you've blistered up your hands with a hatchet, roughing out the profile, and, you know, you've got some hours invested in it, and that'll give you more incentive to tiller slowly. Because that's the other thing about power tools is you can make a lot of mistakes with a hand tool and still recover. But if you slip with, say, a bandsaw, you could ruin a stave in a matter of a half a second. So it's definitely wisest to start with hand tools, but certain power tools do have their place, just not until much later in the instance where you were, making lots of them.
Yeah, it sounds like a true version of mastery. It's not just something you can go and whack out in 2 hours in your workshop, in your garden shed or your garage.
Yeah, you can definitely go out into the woods and whack out a bow in 2 hours, or whack out a decent shooter in your garage with minimal hand tools. But if you want to make this a living, you're going to want to plan on spending a few years honing your skills. I would say it's 5 years invested in being a bowyer at least before you're proficient enough to sell your products. And even it's going to take you even more years of experience and even more bows under your belt before you can start to produce all wood longbows that, rival the performance of manufactured glass bows.
How does it feel different when you're out there with you've obviously shot compound recurve, you've shot the lot, I'd imagine. How does it feel different when you're out there with a bow that you've crafted yourself out of a tree that you've taken down yourself? What's that feeling?
For me, it's so much more about just the connection to the whole cycle of things and to the energy that's inside of the living tree that you had to cut down to craft the bow. I mean, that tree has a soul, if you want to call it that. There's been all this research that shows that, trees, that they're finding out the trees communicate with each other and they can sense magnetic energies as you walk by, and, they have these intelligent systems inside them. So I try to respect them as a living thing not just a piece of wood, and in a way that sort of trees energy. It's becoming a part of you when you craft a bow out of it and you use that as your primary weapon. And it's just something that you can feel. It's hard to describe when you have like an aluminum or a carbon fiber compound bow in your hands. It just feels robotic. It feels lifeless. It's sort of not so much the same with a fiberglass like recurve or longbow, but there's definitely still that feeling of artificiality, the feeling of, the fiberglass or the different plastics that can be made to reinforce the limb tips and things like that. And it just the arrows don't sound the same when they go off. I mean, if you shoot a modern carbon arrow or a modern aluminum arrow out of a fiberglass bow, there's definitely it's a totally different sound. And it's not that it's an artificial sound. It's just that it's a more artificial sound of the synthetic materials, shooting and bouncing off of each other versus like an all wood self bow that's shot off your knuckles with an all wood arrow and natural feathers on the back. It's just a connection to all the living things and the energies that were inside of them when they were still alive that sort of becomes an extension of your body. That's the biggest difference for me. It feels alive. It feels like the self bow has a soul.
That's cool. That's cool. And then you mentioned there wooden arrows. My only experience with arrows, and I've buggered around with this sort of thing, like on bushcraft programs and whatever else, making bows and arrows. And how do you go about making wooden arrows because those things have to be so straight it's ridiculous, otherwise the flight seems to go all over the place. How do you go about achieving that? Like, do you have a form that you use to put it in, or by eyesight, or what's that process?
Well, arrows are a complicated thing. I used to make them all from scratch in house. So I would go to the lumberyard, and this is where the other power tools in the equation come in. I would go to the lumberyard and select, premium hardwood boards that have desirable grain, and I would bring them back to the shop and use a router table with a jig that I made for crafting arrow shafts to, rough out the shape of the shaft. Or, first it starts on the table saw where you rough out your square stock for each arrow. Then you run it through another machine that crafts the arrow shaft. And then, you once you have the raw arrow shafts, it's all just sort of intuitive from there. But you have to understand how. I'm going to try to keep this concise because it's a very broad topic, but you have to understand how the grain affects an arrow. You have to know what to look for as far as what's called grain runout, because you want the grain to run all the way down the length of the shaft. And if it starts to run out on the edges, that's a potential weak point. So you have to understand how grain affects the strength and durability of an arrow. Strength as far as deflection, like how much it flexes. And then after the raw arrow shafts are crafted, the next step is to measure their deflection or their spine. And there's just a little jig that I have on the wall that measures the spine or the deflection. You sort them into batches of stronger versus weaker deflections. They usually go in 5-pound increments. Like, okay, these arrows are suitable for a 30 to 40 pound bow. These arrows are suitable for a 50 to 55 pound bow, so on and so forth. So they're divided into categories, and then they're weighed. If you want to go further, they'll be weighed and weight matched to within 20 grains of each other. And that's done with an electronic scale. So another piece of modern equipment. Wow. And caveat real quick. I'm trying to build primitive archery gear for people that has a high level of precision. So I have to use modern tools to sort of achieve, like a matched set of arrows for my customers that are within 20 grains of each other. Because you'll definitely get differences in flight if you have, say, a 50 or an 80 grain or 100 grain difference in the weight of a shaft versus the next shaft that you fire. And it's not uncommon to get, 50 to 60 or more grains of difference from the same board. So I'm trying to utilize modern equipment to give my customers a bow that's going to shoot accurately and repeatably. And the arrows are definitely a science. So then they're weighed to within 20 grains, and then you have a matched set, and then you craft matched sets based on their deflection value, like which bows they're going to be best suited to. And, their weight.
That's and then you use natural flights and metal for the tips, or what's the next step?
Yeah, that's another thing as far as expedience goes and trying to get my customers their gear as quickly as possible. I do utilize modern points, so they're just they're metal points, steel, usually 2-blade glue-on broadheads, and just ferruled glue-on field points. So, but the feathers are just I use either wild Canadian goose, which I get from local bird hunters, or wild turkey, which I also get from everyone in the community. Just knows that I want their feathers. So during the hunting season in the spring for turkey, I get big boxes of turkey feathers. And during the waterfowl season, which is going on right now, people bring me tubs full of waterfowl feathers.
So it strikes me that a set of matching arrows could end up taking you almost as much time as a bow to make. I mean, that's immensely fiddly, for want of a better way of phrasing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's arrows are a totally different craft. I think it's wisest of you to learn how to craft a good set of matching arrows before you try to craft a bow, because you can make the nicest, fastest, smoothest shooting bow in the world, and if you've got bad arrows that aren't spined properly or that aren't fairly closely matched, it's going to be pointless. So definitely try to learn the arrows first, or at least have it in the back of your mind that you're going to have to put in. Like, you can go out and whittle out a bow as quickly as you want, but if you want a bow that's going to shoot accurately and be accurately repeatable, you're going to have to put in some serious time with your arrows.
Cheapers. Or get your credit card out and go buy some.
Yeah. So the other thing is, it does require a lot of equipment to make your own arrows. I mean, there are certain different wild materials that make it a little easier. Like, you can go out and harvest wild river cane if you have that in your area, or wild bamboo. And then you can make shafts from just the wild bamboo as it is. It's just straightened over a fire. And they're very durable. There's very minimal work required as far as like carving in the nocks and getting them straight, and you don't have to have any extra machinery. And the same can be done for wild shoots in your area, like wild hardwood shoots or shrubby bushes that grow up tall and straight and thin. You can use like second year shoots and try to craft arrows from that. And those are going to work great for a survival situation. But I mean, wild crafted arrows, that you whittle out of green shoots and harden over a fire and just get them as straight as you possibly can in the bush, those will be fine for a survival situation. But if you really want to bring your accuracy and your efficiency up, you'll need a matched set. And a great place for people to start is just to order a matched set from a company that already produces them. Like I've reached the point now where I'm crafting so many arrows that it's totally impossible for me to make them all myself. So just the amount of boards that I would have to go through and the amount of waste that I would have to create to make the huge quantities of match sets that I'm going through now, I just have partnered with a company called Sherwood Shafts out of Oregon, and I order them by the 100 from Sherwood Shafts, and they make some of the best sustainably harvested Douglas fir arrow shafts. I mean, it's probably the industry leader in wooden arrow shafts. They're very high quality. They're very straight. They're already weight matched for you, and the deflection's already been figured out for you. So in the beginning, you can just order raw shafts from a reputable company. Then you're not going to need any large, expensive tools. You're not going to have to invent arrow shaft making jigs. You can just get the raw shafts, learn how to cut nocks, learn how it all works, learn how grain orientation works, and just start from there.
Wow. And folks, if you're listening to this, you should go and check out organicarchery.com, and you can go and see a whole bunch of pictures of Correy's work, of the arrows and bows, and get a real appreciation of this is a blend of, from what I can work out, science and art all at the same time. It's not any one thing, hey? Yeah,
I think there's definitely a science to bow making, especially if you want to be producing at a top level. You're going to have to, and it's going to take understanding of different wood species and a lot of time under your belt before you're going to be ready to produce anything of, real high performance or marketable value.
Cool. That's incredible. So before we started and press record for this interview, I said, hey, Correy, I'm going to give you the opportunity to have a rant or get something off your chest. Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
You just want me to get into it?
Yeah, Correy Hawk, the mic is yours. Tell us your thoughts, mate.
I think something that I'm really frustrated with in this chapter of my life is the sort of instant gratification culture that we live in. I think the different social media platforms kind of, and I mean, they have their utility, right? Obviously, I've built an Instagram business, so I pay my respects to the utility of certain social media programs. But at the same time, there's sort of like this instant gratification culture that's been created where all people see is the end result. They see these, these people that are producing at a high level, maybe fine crafts or arts of some type. And all they see is the end product, and they just don't realize how much sacrifice and how much time and how much effort has gone into creating that end product. And now it's even gotten worse with like these short videos or these, these programs that will only allow you to post for maybe like a minute, like TikTok, for example, where it's just like, I mean, you can make a TikTok video that's like 30 days of work of like maybe crafting a survival bow, like, oh, here's a tree, chop down the tree, cut this thing, like wait a few days, here you go, fashion some stuff, tie a rope to it, bam, you got a bow. And it's like, that was actually 30 days of work. Like he had to cut down the tree, strip the bark, and then let it sit for, 2 weeks before you even touch it. And then, it's just all compiled into this 1 minute video. And I think it gives people, I don't even know what it does. I just think it warps your view of reality. And it warps your understanding of how much work goes into the things that you see on the internet that you find oddly satisfying, whether that's knife making or whatever. Like all you see is this beautifully crafted knife that can slice paper as it's floating through the air. And you don't realize the years or decades of work and the struggles and the ups and downs of entrepreneurship that went into these videos. So I get frustrated by some of the youth that I see today, that have these big dreams of making a craft their profession or doing this or that, but there's no action in their body whatsoever. They just sit around and watch oddly satisfying videos on the internet of these things being done. And they don't ever put their hands to the material. They don't ever just pick up a tool and just, go give it a try. There's no replacement for experience. There's no replacement for actually walking out into the woods and, and looking around at, like we were talking about earlier, the tracks on the ground, or walking around and identifying the hardwood trees in your area. You can watch 1,000 instantly gratifying YouTube videos or 1,000 instantly gratifying TikTok videos where you watch, this tree go from a tree go to a totally seasoned and finished bow in 15 minutes. Or you can spend the 15 minutes just walking out into your backyard and looking at the trees and trying to identify, like, what do I need to be looking for in the bark? Actually go outside and look at the trees and put your hands on the bark and kind of understand what you need to look for. Maybe figure out tree identification. It's just, I don't even know how to tie this all back in. It's just, I've been feeling frustrated by the younger people in my social circle, like extended family and things like that, who they're just trapped in this like zombie-like state of instant gratification. And they don't realize that if they want to accomplish anything in this life, they're going to have to make sacrifices, and they're going to have to get their hands dirty, and they're going to have failures, and they're going to have to work to do what they see everybody else doing that they dream of.
Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody threw the privilege card at me about a week ago, how privileged I am and how I've been given privilege. And I'm like, yeah, I've been given the privilege for the past 12 years to pretty much work 70 hours a week, if not more, every week at one thing. And that's created some privilege for me now. But the privilege wasn't given to me. It was achieved by working my ass off on one thing with one mind, one pursuit, one focus for, I guess, over a decade now. And so, yeah, you can be an overnight success with 10 years worth of experience to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I get people asking me, why do these bows cost so much? And they just don't understand. I mean, all they see is the finished product. They just see a well polished stick that shoots an arrow, and they don't see the almost 10 years of experience that goes into it. Or it's a lot of different things: knowledge, experience, overhead costs, the fact that I'm running a business and I have to pay taxes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's so much that goes into these things, and all they see is the price tag and the end product. And they go, how can this bow be so much money? It's like, you're not just paying me for the bow. You're paying me for the fact that for, say, $1,000 or a little bit more, I can craft you a bow that's going to perform at a top level, and it's going to be reliable, and it's going to come with warranty, and it's going to come with experience and knowledge. And that's what you're paying for. You're paying the $1,000 for me to skip 100 steps in 10 years for you and just put a reliable, fast, bow right into your hands, instead of you having to go through all the trial and error that I've had to go through to get to this point.
Yeah. Cause if George from Missouri or wherever he comes from decides to go and make himself his own longbow, he's going to spend much more than $1,000 in time and wasted materials getting something of the quality that you can give him for that price.
Absolutely. Yeah. How much is your time worth? Because you're going to spend some serious hours crafting, to get to the point where you're making bows that perform well. So how much is your time worth? How much is it worth, for you to take the time to go out to buy the tools? How much is it worth for you to take all this time to research? And so it's all got to be factored in, where we live in this culture where only the end result is appreciated.
And if you actually go and do the maths about how much one of your bows actually costs, $1,000 is actually quite cheap, by the way, because when I think about how many hours you have to put into a bow to have it from like start to finish, and then divide that by 1,000, like forget tax and forget medical insurance and forget anything else, just like divide it by the hours. It's actually a very affordable thing to go buy, because, it's actually surprisingly affordable. That's what I'm going to say as a compliment. Surprisingly affordable.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain things that factor in. You can't price yourself out of the market. You can be producing top level bows, but if they're twice as much as the next guy who's also producing top level bows, it's going to be a much narrower market for you to capitalize on than there already is. So that's kind of what I kind of, if someone, gives me flack for not being a purist, which I used to be a purist and build these bows from start to finish, from the cutting down the tree to the very last step, all with hand tools. And it's like, listen, if you want me to, now that I'm at the amount of production that I'm putting out now, it's like, if you want me to keep these even remotely affordable, you have to understand that, yes, these bows are 100% handcrafted, with the exception that when I have a 4-inch stave, I turn it into a 2-inch stave on a bandsaw, or you know what I mean? There's just a certain level of efficiency as your production goes up. It's the only possible way that you can keep your bows at least semi-affordable for most people. It's a custom. Also, keep in mind that, you can go to the store and buy a bow that's been produced in a factory that has a great warranty and many, many years on the shelves for $300 or $400. But this is a bow that you're ordering custom, and you have to put certain efficiencies in place just to keep it affordable.
Yeah, you can have a bow, but you can have a bow that's not seen any machinery, but by the way, it'll cost 4 times as much.
Yeah, but it'll be handcrafted specifically for you. You'll have a lot of say in how it's built. You have no say in how the factory bow was built that you can just, say, go to the sporting goods store and pick up. We'll be able to have a conversation like what is your intended use for this bow? Like, how strong do you consider yourself, like average or above average? That's going to determine like what draw weight we're going to go with, as well as the application that you have planned for the bow. And there's going to be communication through the whole process, and there's going to be decisions that you have a say in. Like, do you want the bow to be darkened with stain, or do you want it to stay the natural wood color? It's just it's a very different experience. And I think not only are you paying for the handcrafted product, but also the experience to build a one of a kind bow that's going to be the only one like it that you've, had some say in the construction of.
Well, it's a bit like whether you choose to buy a suit off the peg from Nordstrom or somewhere like that, or whether you choose to go to a tailor and get a suit tailored for you. I guess it's all choices you have to make.
Yeah, they're both suits, but they're very, very different.
Yeah. Hey, Correy, I want to thank you for your time today, but also thank you for what you're giving to the world in terms of allowing people to have the opportunity to go and connect with the world in a different way, a more powerful way, a more organic way. And I think more people need to be out there, engaging with the world on a real, like, roll your sleeves up and get dirty basis. And without people like you to lead the way, to encourage folks, the world would be a much worse place. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everything that you do.
I really appreciate you having me on. And I just discovered your show recently, and I've been listening to some of the episodes, and I'm excited to keep listening, man. You got a great show, and I love what you're doing, and I hope it all works out for you. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, when we're in Nebraska next year, I'll be sure to touch base and maybe get you to come and meet some of our folks, some of our listeners, and maybe we should revisit and have another chat in a year's time or so, and see how Organic Archery has grown and what it is that your thoughts are about longbows and everything, arrows, then.
Sure. Sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you for your time, sir. Thank you for your service, and stay incredible.
Have a good one. See ya.
Cheers.